Welcome back. We are very excited for the next 45 minutes or so to be joined by members of each of the Five Eyes partnership and a discussion moderated by Nicole Perlroth of the New York Times. So briefly, we have Mike Burgess, the Director General of the Australian Signals Directorate, Andrew Hampton, the Director General of the New Zealand GCSB, Kieran Martin, Director of the UK NCSC, Scott Jones, the Head of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, as well as Paula Bate from the FBI. So thank you all for being here and turning it over to you, Nicole.
All right, thank you very much. Can you all hear me in the back of the room? Okay, great. So this is the first time, as far as I know, that we've had representatives from each of the Five Eyes organizations represented on one panel, which is a big deal, at least publicly at least. That's a big deal, but it's also not surprising. There's been a lot of firsts over the last year. You've all come together to announce attribution in the NotPetya case. There seems to be some coordination around some of the WannaCry attribution. And I'd like to know sort of how that came about, that you've been more comfortable stepping out together, particularly around attribution. 5 years ago, I think Five Eyes was not a term that the public was very familiar with. Thanks to Mr. Snowden, it became part of the global vernacular. But how did you decide just in the last year and a half, sort of come together and start calling out some of the actors behind some of these nation-state cyber attacks? Kieran, do you want to start?
Sure. Can everybody hear me? Good, thanks. Well, thanks for the introduction. It's important that all five of us are together. We were introduced as the most influential alliance in the cybersecurity world, which is a useful guide, because otherwise people might think it was a boy band reuniting after a 20-year touring gap. I think, why are we doing this? I think there's been a fundamental shift in the way Western governments, particularly in the Five Eyes, though not exclusively, are approaching cybersecurity. And if you're going to get after the threat actors and you're going to get after the problem, you have to, in a sense, go public. But what does go public mean? It means all sorts of things. First of all, it means holding states acting unacceptably outside the bounds of normal accepted behavior accountable, putting diplomatic pressure on them. You heard a lot about that, about US policy innovations from Rob and others over the past 4 or 5 years under 2 administrations, not just accusing other countries of unacceptable behavior, but publishing details of it, indicting people, threatening sanctions, and so forth. But the second thing is about remediation. Ultimately, there is a rather boring, but in my view, equally, if not more important wing to this, which is protecting companies, protecting networks. And to do that, you have to publish information. Yeah. And if you do what we used to do, sort of phase 1 was we would tap on the door of a cleared UK, in our case, national senior executive and tell them that there was something very suspicious going on. Could they please keep it a secret? In the networked age, that's useless because they can't tell their people what to do about it. In phase 2, we'd go a little bit further. We might go and bring them some information, but it would be partial, it would be late because we'd spend so long trying to get it safe. And collectively then in phase 1 and phase 2, we ended up with a lot of knowledge about the problem, but we weren't telling people what they could do about it. Now, if you look, for example, at what we did with DHS and FBI in April 2018, or you look at what we did with the US and the Dutch on the 4th of October 2018 about Russia, backed by everyone on this panel, we published in the UK 8 pages of technical indicators about what Russian state aggression across all sorts of different cyber attacks looks like. And as well as putting pressure on Russia, and it has mattered, the international coalition against Russia has mattered, has had an impact. It means that our companies, and anybody frankly, can look at the website and say, this is what the UK government and the Five Eyes think intrusion sets look like, these are the technical indicators, and they can go and fix them. So that is why we step out into the open on these issues.
Mike, Australia has led a lot of at least the public statements and memos has been written by some of your colleagues. What is the Australian perspective on this? Why be so vocal and at the forefront of this partnership?
Sure. So I don't know if I can actually say it better than Kieran just did. There's some excellent leadership here by the United States and the United Kingdom. For us, the time has come. We've been admiring this problem. That's the collective we, have been admiring this problem for 10 years. Not much traction. You've got to do something. And part of this is consequences. And when there is bad behaviour, you call it out. Now, of course, I'm conscious in this forum you're talking to a guy who also runs an intelligence agency, so let me not wag my finger at anyone, but actually there is a limit to what nations should do, and when that behaviour is clearly over the line, whatever that line might be, but it's pretty clear in this case, you've got to do something, there's got to be consequences, we've got to call it out, and we've got to make it hurt.
So where is the line when it comes to some of these new disinformation campaigns? So prior to the 2016 election, as far as I know, there was not a unit, at least of the US government, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, dedicated to combating misinformation campaigns. Certainly we were looking at malware strings and fingerprints, but how have you all reorganized yourself to combat this misinformation threat? You want to take it? Sure.
Yeah. Look, we're laser focused on that now. We have something that we've created just within the FBI called our Foreign Influence Task Force that focuses exclusively on countering that foreign influence and getting it, preventing it in advance, and then educating the public about that. And we're doing that side by side. What I love about this on display here is the partnerships. And I really believe we're working closer together than ever before. We have a framework where we're cross-detailed and embedded with each other across the Five Eyes community between our countries, sharing information, partnering on the intelligence side and on the operational side to stop bad things from happening, whatever that is, across the whole cyber arena. And that's what we represent here. And we've come a long way. This is a global problem. We're facing global threats, both on the national security side and the criminal side. And we have to work together like this, much like we have to work with the private sector and other government partners to best position ourselves to prevent and disrupt our adversaries from coming at us. But back to the influence piece, we've got the Foreign Influence Task Force. We got out well ahead on the recent midterm elections here in the United States. Our close partners like DHS have an election threat task force as well. And really across the entire US government, we've positioned ourselves, and I think it's reflected in the accomplishments that we've had in countering the threat leading up to the midterms, and the outcomes have shown tremendous success. And we're constantly sharing our experience and vice versa with not only our Five Eyes partners, but others in the international community as well, lessons learned so we can learn from each other and best position each other to stop the threat as far in advance as possible.
Scott.
So I think part of it is also, one of the things we've done is we've published public threat reports explaining what could be done in cyber means in terms of threats to our democratic processes. So we issued a report last year. Canada's got a general election coming up. We'll issue another one early in the new year to get ready for that. But part of that's public discourse, raising that resiliency bar so we start to realize how we could be manipulated. Certainly we're looking at how do we deal with foreign interference type thing. It's from an intelligence perspective. But raising that bar of citizen resiliency, and I think one of the things we've noticed when we talk across government, I think we took our democracies for granted. We forgot what it takes to keep a vibrant democracy going, but our adversaries didn't. They realized what the threats are. They realized part of our democracy is a vibrant debate and disagreements. Well, you can use that to exploit and to sow division. And so cyber's just another means to a national outcome that used to be a lot more difficult to obtain. And so how do you start to deal with that from a more systemic way that really strengthens democracy from its core? But it's hard, and it's not just an intelligence problem. It's an all-of-government problem, and it's an all-of-citizenry problem.
Have you seen any deterrent effect from coming together to call out some of these campaigns? Can you point to any one incident that was stopped, or there were takedowns on Facebook, or takedowns of websites beyond some of the Mueller indictments? Can you point to one specific incident?
So I wouldn't, that's a little bit hard to do, because yes, you might do something tactically that makes a tactical benefit. It's the longer term thing. So I come back to, there's no single blow for freedom here. It's a constant need to pay attention to this. So in Australia, foreign interference has been a big deal. It's had the focus of our government, and we've been on this for a while. We've been subject to some serious interference. But there's nothing new in foreign interference. It's been going on for a long time. The new bit, though, is it's supported by technology, but not just technology. It's the pace, scale, and reach of the problem, and people who are actively engaged at a scale which is unprecedented for us. and it's time to push back and just say this is not acceptable and do things that actually call it out or make it a penalty to do certain things, and we'll continue to do that.
Andrew, in New Zealand, have you seen some of the same threats from misinformation?
Yeah, two points. Firstly, on the issue of collective action and attribution. We're a small trading nation. Our well-being depends on us being connected with the rest of the world, but it also depends on upholding the rule-based order. And so working collectively is one really visible thing we can do to say there are certain types of behaviour that are unacceptable. And yeah, whether or not it's had a tactical impact, not sure. It's definitely had a diplomatic impact. You know, you've seen responses from governments to it. On the issue of foreign interference, this is something which our government is very live to. There's always been a concern around cyber activity generally, but over the last 12 to 18 months, there's been a much greater awareness of cyber being used for a broader range of means. So we had our national election last year. Fortunately, we didn't see evidence of the type of interference campaigns we've seen elsewhere, but for the first time, there was a protocol in place between government and intelligence agencies around how to respond to that.
Let's talk about some of the structural challenges that Five Eyes faces. Within at least the United States, our offensive campaigns are handled by Cyber Command, but we're up against adversaries in China and Russia that are structured quite differently. China, we've seen a healthy contractor based system where people are conducting some of the cyber espionage in their off hours from their jobs at Tencent and other technology companies that we've published information about. In Russia, we've heard Putin himself say hackers are like artists. They just get up in the morning and do what they want, and he has no control over them. You know, how do you tackle the challenge of some of these offensive cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, when we can't point to a clear government unit behind them?
So I'll start on that one. So you're absolutely right, you can't do that, but just calling out a particular unit by itself doesn't solve any particular problem. There's many other things that others have talked about today. I look at this, the nature of the threat that we face as a nation today, and there's two tracks to this story. Yes, I could sit here and tell you the threat's more sophisticated, it's evolving. I don't like saying that, because actually that's true, but that's missing the point, because the other element of this story is we've been talking about this problem now for at least 10 years, probably 15. And whilst progress has been made, there's not a day goes by that there's not another incident in the newspaper or online of a problem which says we're all collectively struggling with this. And I know, my agency knows, every cyber incident we look at, there's a known problem with a known fix that actually should have been fixed in 99.999% of the cases we look at. The best way to deal with this problem is go back to the boring, unsexy stuff of actually the discipline and hygiene about securing things properly. And for the record, the public record, yes, I'm an intelligence and security agency, but I will always defer to security first at the expense of my intelligence capabilities, because I know in Australia, actually, it's far more important for us to have a secure and vibrant and safe internet that enables everything that our country does than having super secret stuff off to the side. Because I've witnessed a few conversations late that think that guys like us, agencies like mine, are hoarding stuff. We're not hoarding stuff. I can tell you that our focus is very much on the security of our nation, and the best way to deliver that is to make sure our use of technology is good, but more importantly, to make sure the business, the community and governments in my country actually identify and manage their cyber risks effectively. All of that will start to deal with most of the problem coming at us. Yes, there are high-end nation states that actually you cannot expect business to protect itself from, but there's a hell of a lot we can do to improve our posture.
Yeah, and just building on that, because I couldn't agree more, and that's one of the fundamental things, and I think what we're seeing is for me, the biggest thing that I'm worried about right now is cyber criminals, because security is a feeling, and the fact that we are not addressing the systemic problem of resilience and of better systems. We see the exact same thing. Pretty much every compromise we see is something that could have been resolved by just applying the basic, boring hygiene. And that goes for advanced persistent threats, so-called. But really, they're going to use the minimum necessary, or to cyber criminals. But cybercrime, with its growth, that's going to undermines confidence. And frankly, security with that being undermined, that's the thing that I'm most worried about from a tactical perspective. Long term, if we don't address the systemic problem, we're going to be doing whack-a-mole for the next 10 years, the next 15 years, and we're never going to get ahead of this issue.
Okay. Well, when we talk about security and good security hygiene, sort of the elephant in the room these days seems to be the issue of encryption. So just in the last year, we've seen representatives from some of your agencies once again sort of resurrecting the debate about how much encryption is too much. And should companies be compelled to provide some sort of backdoor access, whether through legislative means or technical means for global law enforcement? These calls have been brought up again and again recently. So where do you all stand on the encryption debate, backdoor debate?
I think in New Zealand it's interesting. One of the things I'm struck by coming to forums like this is the difference in the relationship between government and the private sector. Like my organisation, we have a mandate to do everything necessary to protect New Zealand's most important information infrastructures. With the consent of our most important organisations, we are on their networks providing both monitoring but also active disruption. Since 2013, we have had a piece of law on our books that requires all network operators to provide interception capability to intelligence agencies for the purpose of national security. And that's accepted. They cooperate willingly. Now that's of limited value when you're talking about a global company, but for New Zealand-based network operators, we have a very strong relationship. I think what you've been seeing with some of the debate recently is both trying to align all of our domestic legal frameworks, but also that collective voice, so we can collectively say to industry, look, we recognise there is a need for us to all cooperate, and you can expect a similar message from all 5 countries.
The last time I checked our website, I think we had 118 recommendations for the use of encryption. So that shows you where we stand on it. We don't seek to weaken it. That was a while ago, so I don't think we've withdrawn any of them, so hopefully it's gone up since then. That shows you where we stand on encryption. I think we need to take the heat out of the debate. The UK NCSC is going to be publishing something in the next few weeks on trying to take the heat out of this. The characterization that agencies like mine or Mike's already covered it admirably would seek to hoard one vulnerability to get at one political leader and leave the tens of millions in our nations exposed to that. First of all, the world doesn't work like that. Technology doesn't work like that. And secondly, if that preposterous hypothetical were to come about, we would secure the safety of our citizens 100 times out of 100. So let's take the heat out of it. What we're talking about is that when you boil it down to should there, where possible, be mechanisms whereby intelligence and law enforcement under strict supervision and clearly transparent law be able to access end product where there is some form of conspiracy to commit harm. I think most sensible and rational people would agree that there should. And then it becomes a question of how do you do that proportionately? It's not as if we're starting from scratch. There's been lots of progress in the debate over the past few years. Let's keep the heat out of the debate and focus on those sorts of pragmatics based on core principles, because not just saying this because it's what people want to hear, but if we compromise on fundamental principles of liberty, then we've just lost the battle.
Yeah. I'd reinforce Kieran's point. For me, encryption is a damn good thing. Breaking encryption for any reason is not acceptable. You can't, backdoor's a stupid concept. But I will come to a point in terms of law enforcement, so this is not my agency asking for laws that help us with encryption, because actually I want encryption in place because it really does make a difference. But the notion of a society, in at least in Australia's democracy, that law enforcement can have access to the tools they need to do the job we need them to do under the rule of law and guided by law. There's nothing wrong with that principle, and actually that's the starting point, but it too quickly goes to government wants full access and it's big brother, it's surveillance state. That's not what we're talking about. So no backdoors, please.
Yeah.
Paul, I'm going to put you in the hot seat here.
I thought I was going to escape here.
The FBI has been pretty vocal about some of its wishes that, for instance, Apple would provide U.S. law enforcement with some form of a backdoor in certain cases. Where does the FBI stand on this issue right now?
I'll start by saying that encryption is essential, and we believe in strong encryption. It's absolutely necessary for cybersecurity and for everything that we do in law enforcement and the intelligence community and the way we communicate internally and externally. So we absolutely need that, and we need to have that to the highest standard. However, we do also, our job is public safety and to protect people, particularly from threats to life and physical violence, and we need to have a way to achieve lawful access, as we always have, particularly in law enforcement. When it comes down to going to court and obtaining a lawful order, we need to have the ability to go out and to enforce that and to have the information to provide it to us in law enforcement to enable us to ensure public safety and to protect our citizens and our countries, whether that's on the criminal side or the national security side. So that is the solution we seek, and we're going to continue to pursue that. I'm heartened because I've seen in very recent times, I think we're making progress toward that, and we have a common understanding, and particularly from our dealings with industry and the private sector, there is a recognition on everyone's part that it's essential that we protect people and we protect life and we protect our national security, and we're continuing to work toward that, and I'm hopeful that we will find that solution that strikes that balance between public safety and privacy and public safety and innovation, but also meets the needs of our mission every day.
Scott, Canada recently reorganized its cybersecurity center so that you're now pulling in elements of various government agencies into one cybersecurity center. How did you come to this approach? How is it working so far?
So it came about because of the cyber review that our government led, which heard from industry, which said we want one single voice. There's too many doors to come into in the federal government. It's confusing. We don't know who to engage with. And so it was a direct result of that. And then we brought together the operational elements. So there'd be one voice for the government of Canada, whether it be an incident, whether there'll be an incident to manage, national leadership, but also trying to drive the national conversation, including increasing resiliency. And so that's now the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Doesn't mean we do it alone, right? Cyber's a team sport. Part of what we do is about bringing together, working with industry. Incredibly, more engagement than we can handle, frankly, in terms of industry wanting to work with us to partner to start to tackle this problem together. Same thing with academia. But at the end of the day, what it really is about bringing it to the organization that has the expertise in this arena. And you'll see it's actually very similar across my Commonwealth colleagues here. We've all created very similar agencies with similar scopes. There's very minor differences. For example, I run the Government of Canada Security Operations Centre, which I think might be a bit of a unique thing. But for the most part, we align very closely. It's about strengthening resilience, increasing that national resilience border. We are the public voice for how to get cyber safe. And that's part of it. It's about bringing that expertise, but we've got to raise the bar. And that's how it came about.
Andrew mentioned before our panel that in New Zealand, you're sitting, in some cases, sitting inside the corporate network, protecting traffic as it comes in and out of these organizations. That sounds so provocative, such a provocative idea when you mention it in the US, particularly after some of the debates around Snowden and privacy. Can you talk about how that's working and how that came about?
Yes, we have a program called Cortex. That's the name we've given it. It's a series of capabilities that we make available to both public and private sector organisations at no cost, but with their consent. And it involves us sitting at different points on their network depending on their risk profile, but also their comfort levels. And what we do is we use threat information, some of it our own, but most of it we get from our partners to actively protect their network. So it sort of avoids the whole issue of having to declassify information so you can pass it to someone else. We're actually doing the active protection. Now, we think it's gone pretty well, but it has involved quite an amount of outreach on behalf of the agencies to build that public trust and confidence. You know, we kicked it off in 2013, was at the height of the Snowden disclosures and things like that. But now we're at a point where we've only had one organisation turn us down. There's a queue of organisations wanting to work with us, and we're currently looking at other ways in which we can scale this service to a much greater group. Indeed, just a couple of months ago, in the New Zealand Public Service, they have an annual awards thing, and we actually won the Public Trust and Confidence Award, which is sort of a bit odd for a SIGINT agency to be doing it, but it goes to that social license thing, and I think you've talked about how the agencies have changed over the last 4 or 5 years. That's part of it, that we have an intelligence mission, but just as important as our protective security mission.
Paul, how far are we away from the FBI or NSA winning the Public Trust and Confidence Award here in the United States?
This might sound contrary, but I think we have it. I'm out all the time visiting field offices, communities that we serve across this country, interacting with partners, both international and in the law enforcement intelligence communities. And despite all of the negativity that may be out there in the media, when we actually, personal experience, when we actually talk with and meet with people from all of the places that I mentioned, I find that we have that trust and we have that credibility, and it's based on the work that we do every day. And when I look back, from the FBI standpoint, over the last couple of years, and this is inclusive of some of our U.S. government partners, the work never stopped. Everyone, whether it's the NSA or the CIA or the FBI, and all of our partners, we've kept our heads down. The tremendous men and women throughout our organizations have kept their heads down, focused on the work, and worked at the mission of keeping people in our country safe, period. And that never wavered, even on what some may consider the darkest days. And whenever I go out and meet with people, it's reflected in every interaction that I have. And I see it reflected in the interactions that our director, our deputy director, and other people from our organization have each and every day. So in spite of everything, I think the trust and the confidence and the credibility is there, and we'll continue to earn that only by continuing to do the work to the highest standards possible, period.
So let's just back up a moment and talk about sort of the new cyber world order. I remember 5-6 years ago, we talked about sort of this order where we had Five Eyes, other nation states like Israel, that were capable of pulling off truly spectacular cyber offensive campaign. But the thing there was that everyone seemed Russia and China, sufficiently deterred from doing so because we were all sort of entangled in globalization. Now we've sort of, and then beneath them there were these other actors, Iran, North Korea, that had less to lose and were willing to pull off some of these louder, more destructive cyber attacks. Now it seems like things have shifted. Russia has become an outlier. It seems they're more brazen in pulling off some of these cyber attacks. We heard about China in the previous panel. And now it seems like you hear less and less about Iran and North Korea as being an immediate threat now that they've been sort of pulled into some of these diplomatic discussions. Is that still holding true? Are there actors on the horizon that we don't hear about a lot in the media that you're all focused on internally?
My answer to that is, has the world changed? I'm not so sure. The threat is significant and needs to be taken seriously. And remember, I'd said before, we've spent the last 10 years talking about and being focused on the protection of data because there's been wholesale theft of data. All of that needs to continue. But any security professional in this room would know security is about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And we now live in a world where we are very dependent on technology. So there's a number of nations that could come at you and cause you problems around integrity, or availability of data and systems, not just theft of data. So the stakes are high. So for me, it doesn't really matter who's the latest problem on the block. Actually, if you're not taking care of how you've identified and managed this risk in a world where we're so dependent on this technology, we haven't seen nothing yet.
But I think just building on that, I totally agree, and we don't make it hard. And so it's within the range of anybody to basically do whatever you want in cyber. There are some pretty spectacular examples of really sophisticated type of cyber activity targeting, whether it be the Five Eyes or our adversaries. But the fact is, you don't have to be. Our industry makes it easy, our technology makes it easy, we're not doing the basics, and it goes back to that resiliency. And so it doesn't have to be sophisticated because we're not upping that resiliency game. And so, we keep wanting to talk about cyber as if it's, Batman dangling from the ceiling in the server room. Well, you don't need to be when you're not patching your systems and the vulnerability's been there for 10 years. We still see 10-year-old vulnerabilities being exploited. And that's the reason why people are getting in. Why would you need to invest in really sophisticated capabilities when you can download them for free off the internet? And that's where we've got to figure out how to up that resiliency.
The two biggest incidents we dealt with in the 2 years of the UK National Cybersecurity Centre were WannaCry and NotPetya. Both were misconfigured attacks that went well beyond the intent of the attacker because of configuration errors by the attackers and exploited weak defenses. That's worth thinking about. Mm-hmm. So I feel really strongly about this. We shouldn't glamorize the problem and look at it as the big balance of power changing geopolitics and so forth. The biggest threat to our cybersecurity is our weak cybersecurity. Yeah. And whether that's from a particular country, from Russia, from North Korea, wherever it may come from, whether it's from a stateless cybercrime group, we're not making the adversaries work hard enough, and we are indeed leaving ourselves vulnerable, as those two incidents showed, to their mistakes. You asked a while ago, Nicole, was any of this having an impact? And I think Mike referred to tactical impacts. My director of operations always tells me that his job is to give the adversary a bad day. Yeah. And there are plenty of examples, which I can't really go into, where we have seen a group that we track all the time trying to do the same basic thing that it's been doing for years, and so all of a sudden it doesn't work. And they come back the next day and they do something different. That means they've had to spend an extra day in a game which is fundamentally about return on investment. It's fundamentally about margins. And at the moment, we have had far too many examples of actors capable of much more sophisticated attacks not having to employ those sophisticated techniques. And that's what we have to get after.
Only point I would add is going back to something Mike said earlier around the importance of organisations upping their resilience. We just released last week a report based on interviews we'd done over about 6 months with 250 organisations of national significance. And it was quite telling and quite depressing, the outcome. There were 4 main areas of weakness identified. One was around governance. These organisations, really important organisations, had quite patchy engagement at an executive level around cyber. Secondly, around investment. People have been investing more in cyber, but they've been getting consultants in to do reviews and things. They haven't been investing in their people and training them or building their own cyber teams. Next area was around, readiness. Yep, about 2/3 of them had plans to deal with an incident, but only about 1/3 had actually rehearsed them in the last year or so. And then the last area of concern is one that's already been touched on, was supply chain. People are outsourcing more and more of their IT, and they think they're outsourcing the risk as well, yet we found about 1/3 of the organisations had no mechanisms in place to hold their providers accountable. Now, sorting those things out won't just protect you from the state actors that our agencies are worried about. They'll protect you from the low-end criminals as well, who are probably more likely to get you.
So let's talk about supply chain attacks. There was this Bloomberg story that we're all probably familiar with. We don't know if it's true, unfortunately, yet. But it did bring up, raise a good discussion, a healthy discussion, in my opinion, about supply chain attacks. And you just brought that up, Andrew. We don't know what is in our devices. What is Five Eyes doing to at least improve the trust in vendors? Is it doing anything? Is Pandora's box open? And we'll never know unless we wrote the code ourselves? Or how are we mitigating supply chain attacks?
Well, I think there's 3 elements to it. So there's the hardware piece that story concentrated on, and it's complicated to do that type of thing. It's certainly within the realm of possibility. But where I look at supply chain, it's when you go into the software, the fact that there's inherent vulnerabilities that are in there. It is perpetuating through. Vendors can't tell you what software is built into their product. So when you try to do a vulnerability assessment or an impact assessment, when something goes public, you can't get a straight answer whether or not they're vulnerable or not, and when the patch is coming. But then you've got the supply chain, where I'm more concerned with the fact that we're outsourcing and we use supply chains of people, supply chains of company to provide our services. So how are we dealing with that as it cascades through the managed service provider chain? Because it doesn't necessarily need to be a chip embedded on a board. When you've outsourced part of your key business operations and it's gone down, and then they've outsourced pieces of that, and that's where they're coming in through, because their cybersecurity is weak and you're probably going to lowest cost. You're probably not, are you measuring security when you're doing that contracting, or are you only measuring cost? And that's what we're seeing, right? And so one of the things we've put out is, here are some things when you're doing outsourcing, here's some security provisions we think you should be putting into contracts. And we worked with our suppliers in the government to do that as well, just to see will it work. But you have to value security, and security costs money to do it right.
Yeah, so I'll pick up where Scott left off. So you have to value security to do it right. That costs money. You've got to value it to spend money. This is a complicated problem, and I've not yet met anyone who has the answer to this. So I'm only going to answer one small element of it. But just to throw this out there, I'm not suggesting the Australian government is thinking about this, but it's something I am struck by. So today, to drive on a road in this country and in mine, you need a licence, and the car that you're driving has to meet a whole lot of standards to be on that road. And then there's law enforcement that makes sure we're trusted on the road, but if we do something wrong, someone will generally get us. In cyberspace and the internet, anyone can write software, anyone can build a device, anyone can connect it to the highway, this thing called the internet, and we're also now critically dependent upon it. Yeah, in our everyday lives, we make sure there are seat belts and airbags in cars, we make sure we train drivers, we make sure we check all of that, but in cyberspace, we're doing none of that from a safety standards and safe open free use of the internet. And that kind of seems odd, given that we're in a world now where actually we will be critically dependent, if not today, on this thing called cyberspace. It seems bizarre to me. No easy answers, but we've got to press into that one and actually do some serious thinking about it.
Can I say one thing? I'm really pleased we're talking about things like supply chain, because it fits with the whole narrative we've got to get out there about protection being the most important thing. So to take a specific example, the attack known in open source exposed last year, amongst others, by one of our sponsors, PwC, is CloudHopper. When CloudHopper comes out, everyone talks about, oh, who done it? You know, are we going to attribute? Are we going to hack back? All this stuff. Actually, the strategic significance of CloudHopper is that it shows that fundamentals of IT security in key parts of the internet infrastructure are not good enough. What are we going to do about that? So, for example, in the UK, we're trying to reconfigure some of our public procurement policies to give a credit check to suppliers. There's things like that. They're technocratic, they're dull, but done properly, they're the things that will have the real impact.
So Rob Joyce mentioned earlier that a lot of the activity we've seen over the last year and a half or so is a lead up to the 2020 election, and that we need to be aware of disinformation campaigns and cyber activity from Russia and elsewhere. What are some of the things on sort of the more innovative ends of the spectrum that your governments are doing to combat some of this activity? I was struck covering the French elections that they were actively planting false information in case Fancy Bear would pick that up. There was, and I don't think any of us knew until the election, the discussions around preventing media around the election coming out 2 days before the election day. You know, in part that helped in France's case combat some of this disinformation that was being leaked. What are some of the things that are being discussed within your organizations about how to combat disinformation? Are false flags part of the discussion? Are hackbacks part of the conversation? how do we combat this in going into the 2020 election here and in your own countries?
So let me start. Of course, we're aware of this. We watch what others have done, and actually, obviously, have been observing what's been happening here in the US. First point, which I know it is here for all of us in the democracies in which we live, is actually, you know what, a vibrant, robust, open debate is a brilliant part of our democracies. So whatever we do, we've got to make sure that continues. But of course, we've got to be mindful of there are those that will actually choose to interfere and do harm and be mischievous or even more concerning behaviours, and we do have to be mindful of that, and we do have to think about what we can do. And what we can do is a full range of nation-state responses. I was pleased to see earlier on the conversation, and Rob hit on it, cyber does not beget cyber. When we're in conversations like this, we always keep going for there's something cyber happening to us, we have to do cyber back. No, we don't. We've been on this planet for a long time. We've got a whole range of things we can do as democratic nations, and this problem is no different. Because again, there is nothing new in interference, it's just the pace, scale and reach of technology and connectivity that makes it so, and it's the speed of cyberspace, the speed of the media, the speed of communications. But whatever we do, we have to be mindful that we don't impede on or damage the democracy that we love.
Yeah. You know, I know I've banged on about it, but part of the answer is that basic resilience thing, you know, and so working with political parties, working with parliaments to help build their resilience. Yep, it won't stop the whole fake news thing necessarily, but it may actually close off a potential vector into getting hold of someone's email account or something like that. So for us, that's where our focus is primarily.
Well, in the UK, we're having a fair amount of practice because we had a referendum on Scottish independence in 2014, a general election in 2015, a referendum in Europe in 2016, and an unexpected general election in 2017. I think we're timing out for a 2018 practice run, which will be a relief to us all, I think. But more seriously, I think in terms of innovative approaches, one of the things we're doing is the stuff we talked about at the start around declassifying information, publishing the threat information, publishing realistic threat assessments. There are things that past form and understanding of intent show that Russia, for example, will attempt and things they will not attempt. And you don't want to just be giving these blanket scare stories that A, B, and C is highly likely when it just isn't. You have to be realistic and honest about the threat. Secondly, if you look at what we did in the 27 election protection campaign, we published data that would have been unthinkable a decade ago, freely and openly. We had 3,000 parliamentary candidates. That is not ranging from, you know, the full range of the political spectrum. That is not a closed community, so we just published it. But I think Mike's hit on a very important point, and I wanted to back it up. Western democracies should not apologise for finding this hard to do. Scott referred to the Commonwealth model now of cybersecurity centres out of SIGINT agencies. If you take something like disinformation, you know, there's no way subsets of signals intelligence agencies want to be verifying political truth and the veracity of political information. So it's the sort of area where government and industry solutions, you know, transparency around is a particular post from a human being or a robot, transparency around paid for information, all of those things need to be looked at, but they are whole of government efforts, and they're about the fundamentals of what sort of democracy you want to have. And if you're a democratic state under attack from a non-democratic state, then you are going to find it hard to do, and that's as it should be.
So, you know, we've pushed into doing things like briefing political parties. I know a lot of my colleagues up here have done the exact same thing. That's something that we wouldn't have done a decade ago, and now we're briefing on cyber threats, and we're meeting with them regularly, including not just the mainstream ones, but every political party, which was a fascinating experience for me. The other things we're doing, we're publishing guides for candidates, just basic cybersecurity things. They're not cybersecurity experts, right? They're running for politics because they're really interested in farming issues or agriculture, things like that. So we need to give them simple, practical things they can do. It's not sexy though, right? And that's the problem. Everybody wants kind of the sexy solution to this. And it's not, it's discussion, debate. My agency sponsored things like fake news panels. I know we've been trying to avoid the term, I've noticed this morning, but the fact is it's going to become really important when we're talking about deepfakes in a few years. The technology exists today. It is going to be pervasive by the 2020s.
You define deepfakes?
Meaning taking a video like this where we're pretty static and not moving and making us look like we said something completely different. Right now, the worst thing we can do is stand behind a podium right? The technology is there now to make me say whatever somebody wants me to say if he wanted to spend enough. It's not hard. That's going to get really easy over the next few years. And then what do? Media is grappling this too. We've engaged with our media companies who are tackling this. They're saying, okay, how do I protect my brand? Because what if it is a logo of a news media with a fake video? Now the media is now trying to defend itself, et cetera. So it is a game changer for us that we're facing. So all of these things, though, take time, they take discussion, and I agree. Right? The beauty of democracy is we have different opinions. We should debate them.
So I'd like to just take these final 5 minutes and take questions from the crowd if we have them. But before I do that, I want to just go down the line and just ask each of you to speak quickly about what is the biggest threat you see in your country today?
Nobody believes it's going to happen to them, so they're not valuing security and investing in it.
Yeah, doing the basics.
What they said, weak security, but also pessimism. There's such a tendency to be so down about all of this and say the threat's going that way and our capabilities are going that way. It's not true. There's quite a lot of good stuff being done across the Western Alliance, and we should talk about it more, and we should make it clear that there are things people can do to protect themselves better, and that has an impact.
Yeah, I think it's the boldness and volume of the threats coming at us, both on the national security side and the criminal side. At all of us collectively, we see that continuing to rise in spite of all the efforts we're doing together to push back on that, call people out, name and shame, oppose costs and consequences. But I also think it's too early to tell, because we've faced this threat for a long time, as has been stated here, but we've only really started to get tough on it and call it out and hold people accountable and impose those costs in the very recent time frame over the last year or two, even within this year. When we look at Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, we've only started really punching back in the very recent times. So I think we have to continue to do that relentlessly, but we also have to see what the future holds in that regard and see what impact that has. But we cannot let up, both in terms of cyber defense and also pushing back on those that are coming after us.
Cybersecurity workforce, I know we've got a session on it this afternoon, but where are we all going to find the people we need for our agencies, let alone to support all the organisations in the public and private sector? So yeah, agree with what these guys have said about the external threats, but I think that's the biggest internal challenge.
Okay, so with that, I think we have a microphone back there. If you do have a question, just please raise your hand and we can come to you. I think we have one right up here and over there.
Thank you. In the arrest of Russian hackers recently, collaboration with Swiss and Dutch intelligence services played a crucial role. Can you comment on whether or not the international collaboration has improved outside of the Five Eyes? Thank you.
I think it's improved immensely. We're light years from where we were just a short time ago. And I look at a good example would be the Alpha Bay Hansa disruption and takedown, and what we did collaboratively with countries that you mentioned and the partners up here. Thought that was amazing work to build out that network, identify it, and then work together to have a disruptive effect. And again, impose costs on the bad guys in that case and shut it down.
Yeah, I agree.
Hi, Tony Cole from Ativo Networks. We've seen some good discussion here today, and just wanted to know what your thoughts are around some cyber breaches that have happened in the past and the potential impact for escalations where it would impact the financial market infrastructure. So do you think that we're ahead of that issue today, where we can potentially have an impact where we still have trust in that infrastructure around the globe as these escalate?
I wouldn't want to spread fear around the threats to the financial system. I think in the UK's experience, and I've heard this from other partners, the financial sector has responded well, probably better than any other sector, to the sorts of challenges that we face. Cybersecurity sort of built into the market incentives mechanism for big financial institutions. They've had the threat of insider trading or fat finger trading for years. In the UK, we've got quite a strong regulator that tries to bake cyber resilience into the wider resilience system. So there are threats there, but we're looking quite proactively at mapping out the new systems, so the interbank clearance systems and so forth, that have come in. And I actually think if you're looking for a model where you've got that sort of resilience baked in, that the financial sector is as good an example as you're going to get. Of course, we've got to be alive to the threats, but I think people can take a good deal of reassurance. Not that we're immune from financial crime via cyber means, of course we're not, but that sort of systemic, global, catastrophic risk is being pretty well managed.
Do you think one of the issues that we face is more so that we lack the technical expertise to face weak cybersecurity, or is it more so that we lack citizens that are educated on cybersecurity and thus they're not demanding it enough?
Sure. So, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So for me, it's not the. We can have an interesting debate, Andrew, about the skills gap. It's not a technical skills issue, of course. If we had more right technical people, that'd be brilliant. It's more the, again, look at what's happened. Big problem. There was a known problem with a known fix, time and time again. That tells you something. We're not doing the basics. The reason why is it hard? I don't know. We've been on this planet for a long time. We have physical defences. Our DNA kicks in when we see a physical threat. We understand it. But in cyberspace, it's really only 10 years old. Yeah. We don't yet have those automatic defences. We don't yet understand it, even though, in my view, it's pretty simple. Education would be key.
Yeah. You know, in that survey that I referred to that we did of 250 of our customers, most of them got cyber and realised it was a big risk to them. They just saw the answer as largely, investing in consultants to do reviews as opposed to investing in educating their own staff about how to manage the risk. So I think there probably is a bit of a shift in emphasis required.
I think for us, we've got to start giving practical solutions that people can actually use rather than really complicated, hard to implement problems, because frankly, people don't get motivated by fear. They want to be, give me a solution and I'll address it. And I think as an industry, that's what we need to start doing. Simple things that people can actually apply in their real life that doesn't make their technological life miserable.
All right, well, with that, we're actually out of time. I'm so sorry, you're gonna have to track these guys down by the food banquet over there. But thank you so much for doing this, and hopefully this is the first of many to come. So thank you.